my perspective is, I think with anything, whenever there is profit to be made, you're going to get businesses popping up trying to make money from people.
Hey guys, welcome back to another podcast episode. This is really fun. I've had a lot of fun doing these and interviewing some interesting people and just having some general conversations, a little bit different from the usual videos. But we're back. It's summer almost, well, kind of. I suppose it is summer. And I'm here with a new guest. So, Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself and let us know, who you are and what you do?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Michelle Shafdia. I'm an ADHD coach and I have a business called Find Your Spark.
Interesting.
And I have ADHD as well.
Yeah. So we met on Instagram and we did an Instagram live initially, right? And I'm interested, what does being an ADHD coach, what does that entail? What would you say defines that role?
Okay, so I trained as a coaching psychologist way back when, before I knew I had ADHD. So I was a coach and then found out I had ADHD and realized there's certain things that people with ADHD require that a neurotypical person would not, based on our brains. So one of them being the fact that we have working memory issues. So for someone with ADHD, they need reminders, they need email sent saying, this is what we did today. That extra prompt, because of our what would be considered a bit of a disability when it comes to our working memory.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you need to factor that in.
Yeah, so in terms of coaching, are you do you work with one-on-one clients? Do you work with a group of clients? How does it work?
Yeah, both. So, for example, in a school that I work in Essex, I work both with one-to-one clients and in a group. And these children typically all have neurodivergent conditions. But on the whole, the majority of these children, it's all about anxiety. They're so anxious. So I'm just kind of helping them ease their anxieties and validating their anxieties and experiences.
Wow. Would you say that you predominantly work with children then, or is it kind of across the board?
Well, when I set up Find Your Spark, it was predominantly for children. But then I realized as I was doing it that if I could work with parents and schools as well, then it was going to have a much bigger impact on the child. And I also, since finding out I have ADHD, I work with ADHD adults.
Interesting. So what's Find Your Spark? What's the main thing that Find Your Spark is? Are you predominantly a coaching company or are you kind of like a training company? Like what is Find Your Spark?
Well, I set it up. It was all about the social purpose was all about raising well-being in children, parents. And then since then, it's all about, it is coaching, I suppose, specifically that's what I'm trained in. But there is a training element because I feel like the schools need a bit of training. The parents need a bit of support. I would say it's an overall support.
Yeah, like a support coach. So where would you say the biggest issue lies with ADHD in kids? Would you say that the issue lies in education or is it at home? Or where would you say big issues are or where you're finding big issues?
So where I'm finding big issues is in the understanding of ADHD, because what I'm noticing is, even though, I don't know what your experience has been, but I found out 2 years ago, and since then I feel like ADHD has kind of exploded a lot more. There is a lot more awareness, but even still, despite all this, a lot of people don't know really what ADHD is. And because of that, and it's not their fault, but schools, because they don't understand, they don't really know how to deal with those students. Parents don't understand it, so they don't know how to support their child if they themselves don't have ADHD. So I feel like it's an awareness, understanding piece that needs to be occurring.
So it's really interesting. How many of the kids or the people that you deal with, how many of them have come up with conditions like ADHD and autism, or is it more just ADHD that you deal with?
Both. So actually, the majority of the children I work with at the moment are autistic. I've got a couple of ADHD, and there's going to be overlap, isn't there? There's some children who have autism and ADHD. So I guess I'll see that more. But I think as ADHD gets understood and diagnosed properly, I think we're going to see more ADHD kids that I'm going to be working with, girls, girls specifically, because as we both know, girls were completely missed.
100%. Yeah, yeah. And
So,
it's really interesting. I was talking to another author on my show on Monday night, and she's a woman who's diagnosed with ADHD, and it's really funny. She wasn't diagnosed until she was in her 40s with ADHD, right? And those kind of things. It's just mind blowing to think that all the people have missed out. Now, did you
yeah.
see that thing? There was something really interesting I saw on the BBC. It was the ADHD private clinics, right? This whole scam thing.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
so okay, just for anybody listening or watching who doesn't know what we're talking about, the BBC did an investigative journalism piece, right, where they went to the NHS and they got a diagnosis, or they went through the diagnostic process with this gentleman for ADHD, and they said, you don't have ADHD, you're pretty much well and good to go. You don't need any medication, any therapy, you're fine. He said, okay, cool. Then he hired, I think he went to 2 or 3 online clinics, right, on the internet, that ADHD kind of diagnostic clinics, and they paid per session, I think about 500 quid or something. Anyway, after he filmed one of them, and the woman she spent about 30 minutes with him asking him crazy questions. And then she said, yep, you got ADHD and here's your diagnosis. And then you can get these drugs, these drugs, these drugs. It was like, whoa. So I don't really know what to think of that. What's your opinion on this? As an ADHD coach and a person with ADHD, what do you think about that?
Okay, so I think I've got perhaps a different perspective of this, because it caused a whole furore, didn't it? This panorama episode, and rightly so. I think my perspective is, I think with anything, whenever there is profit to be made, you're going to get businesses popping up trying to make money from people and exploiting people, especially vulnerable people. And people with ADHD or who think they've got ADHD are more prone to be perhaps exploited and manipulated. So we've got to be aware of this. We've got to be, cautious about this happening. But in the same breath, there is a lot more ADHD cases out there than have been diagnosed. I think I looked it up, and there's 120,000 people that have been diagnosed so far, and 2 million are still yet to be diagnosed due to the fact that the NHS wasn't set up to be able to diagnose this way back when. Yeah. So because of that, people are having to go private. So, but we've just got to be a bit more discerning with these private organisations, because some of them are going to be a little bit corrupt and a little bit devious. But there are lots of them out there that are perfectly legitimate and who just want to do the right thing by the patient.
Yeah, because there was a thing. The guy said something like there was a no diagnosis, no fee policy, right? Which is interesting, because that's driving you to want to, if you're a company and your main objective is to make money, right? Because all companies need money, but then the only way you're going to make money is if you're diagnosing people. Then you're going to be more kind of inclined to say, okay, here's your diagnostic papers, you've got ADHD, now pay me. Because if they don't, they've just wasted 30 minutes of their time, but they could have been diagnosing somebody and they would have had money for that. But in the same breath, it's kind of like, well, it's really bizarre, isn't it? That's where healthcare and finances kind of clash over a little bit. And I think, there's, especially in America, it's a big thing. I know here in the UK we have the NHS, which is a brilliant system, and I do love it. And I do think it just needs a lot more help. But it's interesting. I don't know. I felt like the Panorama documentary was trying to not expose private clinics, but more expose or delegitimize the diagnostic criteria of somebody, right, with ADHD. I think they were just almost making a mockery and saying well, ADHD can be diagnosed willy-nilly, then it's not something we can be concerned about. Do you feel like that too? Yeah,
I do think there might have been that slant to it. I mean, I don't know the producers and personally, so obviously they would be better to say that, but there could be that slant, and they could be saying that, but they would be wrong, because the fact that way back when the DSM didn't even have adult ADHD as a thing, and it was just thought that children grew out of ADHD. So all these adults were not even thought that they had ADHD. They thought it didn't exist. The NHS, there was nothing there. There was no pathway for adults. There was nothing set up. So that is the reason. There was no awareness, there was no education, no information, and that's why it's all coming out now. But as with everything, when there hasn't been anything, it often goes to the other extreme. So now we've seen a bit of an explosion, and there's a lot of awareness. When I was going through it, and I didn't even realize it was ADHD, there was nothing. So you've got to go from nothing to lots before you find an equal balance, which is where we'll get to. But I don't think it's a case of, I think I've heard people say, oh, when I was at school, there was no such thing as ADHD or autism, and no one had it, and now everyone seems to have it, and it's trendy. And it's like, well, no, it's because it wasn't educated. People weren't educated in it and realized.
Joe's funny. I hear a similar argument. People say like, "Oh, you know, when I was younger, there was no such thing as gluten-free or gluten intolerances. We just ate bread. Bread was bread." It's like people have been eating bread for millions of years. It's like, yeah, you dingus. But just because you hadn't heard of it doesn't mean that people weren't lactose intolerant or people weren't celiacs. You know what I mean? It's like, what a stupid observation to have. Like it's just stuff like that annoys me. It's just ignorance in people.
Yeah.
Okay, so So here's a question. What do you say the biggest barrier to for ADHD people to get diagnosis is? Like, what's the biggest hurdle we're facing right now?
Biggest barrier, I would say it is the fact that there's the awareness piece. So people still aren't fully aware, so they might be getting bullied. I know a lot of children in schools are being bullied because people don't understand ADHD. So especially children who wear ear defenders, they get picked on. I mean, when I was at school, it was glasses. Now it's ear defenders. It shouldn't be happening. That's one of the biggest barriers. Then obviously we've got a barrier when it comes to getting diagnosed, and the assessment process being such a long process. Having to wait years and years and years. And so then they get desperate and then they have to go private. And that's a barrier. But hopefully in time that's all gonna lessen. I just for me it was 5 years. 5 years it took.
Holy smokes!
To get diagnosed. Yeah.
So what's the outcome? You know, say someone who is clearly an ADHD person, and you know they're on this waiting list to get a diagnosis, but they haven't got a formal diagnosis yet. So which means they can't access support. What do you think the biggest kind of detrimental factor is for a person who is ADHD but undiagnosed? What's the biggest thing that's like impacting them?
Gosh, there's many. I think the fact if you're undiagnosed and you've gone throughout your whole life not being diagnosed, it kind of always goes back to this understanding. So people don't understand you, you don't understand yourself. So in that, your life isn't going to be as easy because of the accommodations aren't going to be made for you. You're not going to know how to look after yourself properly because you don't know yourself. Then I guess it also comes down to medication. Like medication helped. It's helped me. But if you didn't know you had ADHD, you wouldn't be medicated for it. So the longer it's put off, the harder those people's lives are going to potentially be. Not necessarily always, but that's just my kind of experience, I suppose. Yeah, I know, because you know, being in this kind of in this niche and kind of helping people, and I coach people too with autism and ADHD. I think one of the biggest barriers that people have is access to good support and genuine support, and that's why I think a lot of them go towards coaching, because they just need that person to be like, hey, why not try this, or hey, your feelings are valid, and all those things are really important. But I think a lot of people can't access support because they don't have a diagnosis, right? And so they need a diagnosis, but you can't get the diagnosis because there's a huge waiting list. It's a whole thing. And I think like it's so difficult at the moment. And then of course, if you're going private, then you get programs like the Panorama program, and then they come up and say, oh, don't go private. So it's like, well, where do you go? You know what I mean? Yeah. And I don't think, and that's another thing, like I don't think there's an exploding epidemic of people suddenly having ADHD. What I do think is that people like yourself and channels like mine, we're educating people more broader now, and so people kind of see it in themselves and they reflect and they say, wow, I'm not this like weird hyperactive guy or whatever. I actually may have ADHD, and then they go and get this diagnosis, and it makes more sense. And I think I think that's a good thing. I think like more awareness and more understanding of who we are as people is going to be able to allow them to support other people in that same position. You know what I mean? 100%. Yeah, it's back when I was at school, ADHD, not even when I was in school, even like a few years ago, ADHD was seen as something that little naughty boys had. But actually that's not true. That's misinformation. And I know I grew up thinking I was like mad, bad, lazy, crazy. All those things were probably told to me throughout my life, and actually it wasn't the case. So, but if you grow up thinking that, imagine your self-esteem is impacted. You know, your quality of life is impacted by those statements constantly being told to you. But actually, it was because my brain had a disability. There's, you know, some people see it as a disability or a difference or a challenge, and for that reason, that is why my behavior was the way it was. It was different.
It's so interesting.
So it's so interesting, and the key message I think for me is, and why this is so important and why I'm so passionate about it, is people with ADHD are 5 times more likely to kill themselves because we have such, you know, we feel things quite heavily and we're quite impulsive. So if we feel particularly depressed or angry, we might lash out or we might take our own life because we're so impulsive. And for that reason, that's why it literally is a matter of life and death, why we do what we do, because we are trying to support people to not end up in that position and prevent that from happening. So yeah, it's massive. I'm so passionate about it.
Interesting. Okay, so to end off here, what is the future for, you know, you find your spark and everything that you're doing? Like, what's your kind of future goals? What do you got coming up?
So I've got coming up imminently. I've got 2 ADHD awareness sessions, because I think it's the awareness piece that is so important here in Essex. So on the 19th and 26th of June. So I've basically created something that I needed when I was going through this process. You know, I found the whole thing a bit of a minefield to navigate, so I've created something to help with that. And I want to do that more. I want to reach out, help as many people as I possibly can through ADHD coaching or awareness sessions, support parents, children, schools, adults. You know, I think there is a need there for this to happen. So I'm prepared to be that person to support those people.
So how can people get in touch with you and find you on the internet if they want to reach out and talk to you?
Yeah, so my website is www.findyourspark.co.uk. I'm on Instagram, it's Find Your Spark ADHD, or my name, Michelle Shatia. I think they're the best ways to contact me.
Amazing. Okay, cool. Well, Michelle, it's been amazing to speak to you again. And yeah, you're just such an interesting guest. It was awesome to do 2 pieces of you. So thank you for joining me today. And yeah, good luck with all the stuff in the future.
Thank you so much.